Okay, welcome back. In today's video, we're going to be looking at the end of Stave 3 of A Christmas Carol, focusing on the presentation of the characters ignorance and want. As usual, I'll read the whole extract and then we'll go through key annotations afterwards. And again, I would just remind you, you don't need to write down every single word. The annotations that I think are the most important are highlighted, they're in bold. So if you want to just kind of look through for those most important ones, you can do. As usual, the timings for the analysis will be below. So, ignorance and want. Much they saw, and far they went, and many homes they visited, but always with a happy end. The spirits stood beside sick beds, and they were cheerful, on foreign lands, and they were close at home, by struggling men, and they were patient in their greater hope, by poverty, and it was rich. In almshouse, hospital, and jail, in misery's every refuge, where vain man in his little brief authority had not made fast the door, and barred the spirit out, he left his blessing, and taught Scrooge his precepts. It was a long night, if it were only a night, but Scrooge had doubts of this, because the Christmas holidays appeared to be condensed into the space of time they passed together. It was strange, too, that while Scrooge remained unaltered in his outward form, the ghost grew older, clearly older. Scrooge had observed this change, but never spoke of it until they left a children's 12th night party, when, looking at the spirit as they stood together in an open place, he noticed that its hair was grey. "Are spirits' lives so short?" asked Scrooge. "My life upon this globe is very brief," replied the ghost. "It ends tonight." "Tonight!" cried Scrooge. "Tonight at midnight. Hark, the time is drawing near." The chimes were ringing the 11:15 at that moment. "Forgive me if I am not justified in what I ask," said Scrooge, looking intently at the spirit's robe, "but I see something strange, and not belonging to yourself, protruding from your skirts. Is it a foot or a claw?" "It might be a claw, for the flesh there is upon it," was the spirit's sorrowful reply. "Look here." From the foldings of its robe it brought two children, wretched, abject, frightful, hideous, miserable. They knelt down at its feet and clung upon the outside of its garment. "Oh, man, look here, look down here," exclaimed the ghost. They were a boy and girl, yellow, meagre, ragged, scowling, wolfish, but prostrate, too, in their humility. Where graceful youth should have filled their features out and touched them with its freshest tints, a stale and shriveled hand like that of age had pinched and twisted them and pulled them into shreds. Where angels might have sat enthroned, devils lurked and glared out, menacing. No change, no degradation, no perversion of humanity in any grade through all the mysteries of wonderful creation has monsters half so horrible and dread. Scrooge started back, appalled. Having them shown to him in this way, he tried to say they were fine children, but the words choked themselves rather than be parties to a lie of such enormous magnitude. "Spirit, are they yours?" Scrooge could say no more. "They are man's," said the spirit, looking down upon them, "and they cling to me, appealing from their fathers. This boy is ignorance, this girl is want. Beware them both, and all of their degree, but most of all beware this boy, for on his brow I see that written which is doom, unless the writing be erased. Deny it," cried the spirit, stretching out its hand towards the city. "Slander those who tell it ye, admit it for your factious purposes, and make it worse, and bide the end." "Have they no refuge or resource?" cried Scrooge. "Are there no prisons?" said the spirit, turning on him for the last time with his own words. "Are there no workhouses?" The bell struck 12. Scrooge looked about him for the ghost and saw it not. As the last stroke ceased to vibrate, he remembered the prediction of old Jacob Marley, and lifting up his eyes, beheld a solemn phantom, draped and hooded, coming like a mist along the ground towards him. Okay. So, this slightly strange extract then focuses on the sins of society, its chief sins being ignorance and want. And these two children are the personification of these two social problems in the society that Scrooge lives in the Victorian era that Dickens was writing about. So ignorance refers to the sins of the middle classes, really, those that are wealthy, those who have privileged and comfortable lives. They choose to remain ignorant of the suffering of others. They ignore the problems that are in the city around them. whereas the social problem of want, refers to the suffering of the poor, that they do not have the things that they need. They don't have homes, they don't have enough food, they don't have enough money, they live difficult and unhappy lives. So these are the two social problems that Dickens is using this novel to shine a light on and to expose and to criticise. So we'll have a quick look through and we'll just talk through some of these annotations then. So at first, the Spirit and Scrooge carry on their travels. Remember, they went through the city streets, they travelled to the mines and the lighthouse and the ship at sea before they went to Bob Cratchit's house and before they visited Fred's Christmas celebrations. And they carry on their journey. So the ghost takes him to many more Christmas scenes, and in each one, the Christmas spirit is felt no matter what condition the people are in. So they go to hospitals and jails, they go to misery's every refuge, anywhere that people might be unhappy. But in every single one, the Christmas spirit is there, is felt, and the spirit goes and blesses all of these different places. So again, much like the scene with the miners and the lighthouse, this is just pointing out how isolated Scrooge truly is in ignoring the Christmas spirit, in turning his back on this time of year when everyone else is being brought together and being united by their faith and their love and all of those good and positive things that society can offer too. We notice as well that it was a long night if it were only a night, but Scrooge had his doubts of this because the Christmas holidays appeared to be condensed into the space of time they passed together. So time seems to become strangely flexible when Scrooge is with the ghost, as if the whole Christmas season takes place in a single night. And again, this is Dickens playing with the more supernatural elements involving the ghosts. Time seems to become quite elastic. So it reminds us that Scrooge is undertaking a really strange and supernatural experience here. And as they've been travelling together, the ghost of Christmas Present has been getting older, visibly older. His hair is turning grey, and it looks as though he has not long left to live. He explains, "My life upon this globe is very brief." Now, I think that Dickens is doing something really fascinating here. All the way through the novel, with the ringing clocks and the bells ringing, he's reminding us that the clock is ticking, time is constantly running out. And it reminds us that Scrooge has limited time left in which to mend his ways. He's a fairly old man by the time he's visited by Marley's ghost. And we're reminded that Marley has already died 7 years previously, so we wonder how much longer Scrooge has to live. So Dickens is also reminding us, as his audience, that our lives are also slowly passing. The clock is ticking for everyone. Now, our lives aren't as short as the ghosts, but we still have limited years in which we are on this planet, in which we can make a positive change to our society. And Dickens is reminding us, as his readers, of our social responsibility. Just like Scrooge, we have a duty not to be ignorant. Just like Scrooge, we have a duty to try and alleviate, to try and lighten the suffering of those around us. Okay, so at midnight, Scrooge notices this strange claw-looking foot poking out from underneath the ghost's robes, and when he parts his robe, there are two small children hiding beneath, and these children are the personification of society's problems, ignorance and want. So he notes that it might look like a claw, and the ghost says it might be a claw for all the flesh there is upon it. So the feet of the children are like claws, and this suggests that they are emaciated, they're painfully thin due to their lack of food, due to the fact that they are living in poverty, they're almost starving. And Dickens also uses this language to dehumanise these children and make them seem almost animalistic. And by doing this, he could be critiquing the way in which the Victorian middle classes saw the poor as almost a different species, almost lesser, because they believed that the poor were responsible for their own condition, for their own suffering. They didn't necessarily see them as ordinary people, just like them. So, we have this long description. The children are wretched, abject, frightful, hideous, and miserable, and they kneel down at the feet of the ghost. Now, this is really important, I think. When we think of children, we think of innocent and vulnerable individuals. Now, these children are described in terms which make us both pity and fear them. They're wretched and abject. They're without any kind of hope or redeeming qualities. But they're also frightful and hideous to look upon. Now, because they are the personification of the social problems in the Victorian era, they represent the problems that most people would prefer to ignore. Now, Dickens's description here implies that the children are really hard to look at. They're incredibly unpleasant, they're wretched and frightful and miserable and hideous. And because they're hard to look at, this could reflect the way that it's actually quite painful to confront the failures of society. And you have probably experienced similar kinds of emotions. Sometimes when you're confronted with particularly upsetting or difficult information, it can be quite hard to take in and you might want to turn away. Think of when you see advertisements on TV by charities and things like that. They're often quite hard to watch because you're being confronted with the suffering of other living people. And when you're feeling that urge to look away, it's because you have empathy for them. You relate to their suffering. So Scrooge is being confronted with what these problems really mean. When Scrooge chooses to be ignorant of the suffering of the poor, when he chooses to say, "Are there no prisons? Are there no workhouses?" he's neglecting those poor, innocent children whose lives are being damaged by his choice to be ignorant. His choices to be ignorant and ignore the suffering of others and not share his wealth has a knock-on effect for those people that are being neglected by society. It has a real impact on those who are living in poverty. Okay, so they're described as yellow, meagre, ragged, scowling, wolfish, but prostrate too in their humility because they're kneeling down. They're looking humble. So their pitiable appearances are described in detail. They're unpleasant to look at, but they're also humble. And this reminds us that they don't deserve the conditions they've been forced to live in. Where graceful youth should have filled their features out and touched them with its freshest tints, a stale and shrivelled hand like that of age had pinched and twisted them and pulled them into shreds. So, this suggests that the children have been robbed of their childhoods. They should look plump and youthful, but actually it's as though they've almost been withered away by age. They look thin, they look stale, they look shrivelled. So Dickens here is suggesting that they've been robbed of their childhoods, they've lost their youth, they've lost their innocence because of the harsh conditions that they've been forced to live in. So thinking back to your AO3, your connections to context and big ideas, we know that Dickens was deeply concerned about the suffering of children, and he's really using this image to convey his anger and shame at how society turns its back upon the children of the poor, leaving them to suffer as child labourers or in workhouses. So this is an image which remains with us long after we've closed the book, the image of these poor, starving children, prematurely aged by the conditions that they're living in, is designed to haunt his reader. Where angels might have sat enthroned, devils lurked and glared out menacing. So this metaphor is suggesting that these children could have looked like angels, but in fact there's something devilish about them. So he's suggesting that if the children had been treated well and looked after, they could have been angelic and good, but actually they look like devils. So this suggests that their upbringing has damaged them, and now they're wicked, and it suggests that this cycle of suffering is going to continue. Their poverty will be passed on to the next generation and the next and the next, because they've had such a difficult upbringing. They've been turned wicked by the conditions in which they've lived. Okay, so Scrooge is horrified to look upon these children, and he struggles. He wants to tell a lie. He wants to say, "What lovely children," but he can't bring out the words because he knows what a huge lie it would be to say that. So instead he asks the spirit whether they belong to him, and the ghost replies that they belong to man. They are man's. So he explains that these children belong to mankind. They belong to all of us. They represent two of society's worst vices, ignorance and want. So they are the sins of Scrooge's society. They belong to mankind. They belong to anyone who would leave the suffering wanting and would remain in ignorance of their condition. So they cling to me, appealing from their fathers. This boy is ignorance. So this child is the personification of an idea. He represents the idea of ignorance. So ignorance means ignoring the problems in society, turning a blind eye to the suffering of others. This is what Scrooge is particularly guilty of. And thinking about your context, Dickens is using the novel to critique the wealthy middle classes for their ignorance of the suffering of the poor, and Scrooge is particularly guilty of this. So Dickens uses Scrooge as a vehicle to criticise the willing ignorance of the middle classes. This girl is want. So want represents the suffering of the poor in Victorian society. The less fortunate want homes, they want food, they want potentially money to have a more stable life, and they want happiness. The ghost warns Scrooge in particular, beware this boy, for on his brow I see written that which is doom. So Dickens here is perhaps suggesting that doom awaits those who remain ignorant of the suffering of others. We know that this is Scrooge's worst sin, and that if he doesn't mend his ways, he's going to be condemned to purgatory, just like Marley and all of those other ghosts that he saw back in Stave 1, desperate to help those that they can see suffering but unable to do so, and they're forced to carry all those chains of their sins. So this really is Dickens's warning to the wealthy middle classes. Ignoring these people is a sin and it will lead to your doom. So Scrooge asks, have they no refuge or resource? Is there nowhere they can go? And the spirit turns back to him and confronts him with his own words. Are there no prisons? Are there no workhouses? So when Scrooge is appalled to hear about the existence of these children, he asks if there is nowhere that they can go to be looked after. And in reply, the ghost turns his own words against him. So here, Scrooge is being forced to realise that prisons and workhouses are not the way to solve society's problems, and their existence has allowed him to ignore his own responsibilities, his moral responsibilities, to look after his fellow man. It's very easy when the charity workers come to Scrooge's door for him to say, well, isn't it for the workhouses to deal with these people? Because it allows him to say it's not his responsibility. So here, though, Scrooge can't imagine putting these children into a workhouse or a prison. When he actually thinks about it, the idea is really unpleasant to him, so he asks if they know refuge, have they no safe place to go? And the ghost says, by your logic, they should be in a prison or a workhouse. Now at this point, the bell tolls midnight. It strikes 12, and as Scrooge looks around him for the ghost, he doesn't see it. So 12 o'clock has struck, and he's been left alone again. But as the last strokes cease to vibrate, he remembers what Marley has said, and looking upwards, he remembers he's about to be visited by the third and final spirit and sees this solemn phantom coming towards him. Now, this stave ends really ominously with the appearance of the ghost of Christmas yet to come, the third and final spirit that he will be visited by. Now, its sinister appearance suggests it's going to have a very hard lesson for Scrooge. It's draped and it's hooded, and it comes like a mist along the ground, so it's more of our sort of traditional ghostly apparition. And in this way, it seems evocative of the idea of death. It seems much more sinister. So we will leave Stave 3 there for today. I hope that has been useful, and we will begin in our next video looking at Stave 4, the Ghost of Christmas Yet to Come. Thanks for listening. I hope that was helpful. See you next time.